Hi, everybody. Tony Marcolini. Welcome to It May Interest You to Know. I'm joined today with my co-host, Seamus McDonough, and also a very special guest is with us today. He has had an amazing career as a writer. You're going to know him from projects like Who's the Boss and Family Ties and Seinfeld, Emmy nominated. Right now, he's got a series of mystery novels that he's got me hooked on. Welcome for me, Lawrence Levy.
Hi, Tony and Seamus. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Hi.
Nice to meet you as well. So I want to get to your mystery novels because I picked one up and now you have me addicted. But before I get
Thank you very much for that.
I want to go back to the early years for you and
Okay.
Pick your brain a little bit about some of the early projects. I did not know this, but you actually wrote some scripts for Trapper John MD, the old drama.
Yes, I did write a script. In fact, it was based on my own experience. When I was 18 years old, I was a freshman at Cornell University, and we went in. I had my first chest X-ray ever. And they said, you got to come back here. We got to take another one. And they found all these lesions on my lungs. And it was scary. They said you could have Hodgkin's disease or you could have this thing called sarcoidosis. And they wound up taking a lymph node out of my neck. Christmas vacation, they found it was sarcoidosis. It's something that I've lived with all these years, where Hodgkin's, you may not live. Actually, you can die of sarcoidosis too, but I didn't have that. It wasn't that severe. Yeah, you don't remember the comic Bernie Mac?
No, actually, I don't.
An African-American comic. He had his own TV show on Fox.
Oh, yeah. I do remember that. Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry.
He died of sarcoidosis, but his was much more severe than mine. So The Trapper John was a story about one of the interns who self-diagnosed himself and thought he had Hodgkin's disease, and he really had sarcoidosis. That was the story, and I just pitched it to them, and they said, "Let's do it." So.
Wow.
If that's anything.
Now, how close did you watch? Were you a follower of MASH when it was on?
Oh, sure. David Isaacs, who was a writer on that show for all the years that MASH was on, was a friend of mine. I used to follow it quite well. It was a wonderful show.
How close were you forced to follow any character traits, from MASH because it really was supposed to be the same character.
Right. It's a little different. He's in a hospital in the States and he's much older. It's Pernell Roberts, it didn't have a lot to do with that, unfortunately. The show, from what I saw, it didn't have a lot to do with that kind of zany humor that MASH had. It was more a straight hospital show.
Right. So then you move on. You seem to move out of the drama genre more into comedy.
Yeah, I've had a very eclectic career. I've done hour drama shows. I've done a lot of half-hour comedy. I ran an animated show. I've written, obviously, as you mentioned, historical fiction mystery novels. So I've been all over the place. It's what I just feel like doing at the time when it excites me,
Can we talk a little bit about Family Ties and what that was like?
Yeah, actually, that was also based on the story I wrote for them. The script I wrote for them was based on actually something that happened to me. It was when I was a kid, my great aunt died, and I went to her funeral. And the guy who was doing the eulogy got her name wrong. He called her Ruth instead of Rose, and it really upset me that somebody who didn't know my aunt at all is giving a eulogy about her. So I did that with Family Ties, where Mallory's favorite aunt dies, and the same thing happens to her. But the comedic part of it was that they had put out signs for a garage sale, and people coming back from the funeral, and people were showing up for the garage sale at the same time, and that kind of mixed up thing that went on. So that's how you got the humor out of it, But so, you know, it's, you draw things from your life, you look at the characters, you see what they might do or what they've done in the past, and you try and come up with a story, you know?
Sure. Now you also did, I mean, just a host of other shows, like I think you did Saved by the Bell, Who's the Boss?
Right.
And the big one, I mean, well, they're all huge. They were all blockbuster in their, you know, in their day.
Also, Roseanne, you know, I did Roseanne.
Roseanne, true. I mean, Roseanne's another huge one. I guess I'd like to talk about all of them if I could, but I guess I'm chomping at the bit to get to Seinfeld.
That's always the big one. That's always, and it should be. It's a great show.
But I loved Who's the Boss with Tony. I love that show.
Oh yeah, 10 Tony Danzig, Who's the Boss? Sure.
Yeah.
So I mean,
he was a boxer. Did you know, Seamus? You know that he was a boxer?
I did know that. Actually went to the Gramercy gym on 14th Street when I was there many years ago, and I knew his trainer, Al Gavin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and because I know he started out as a boxer, and I don't know how that translated to getting the role in Taxi, but he did.
Yeah.
Oh, so now Seinfeld, I want to say you are Emmy nominated for one of the scripts you wrote for Seinfeld. True?
Right. The Mango.
The Mango.
And I won the Writers Guild Award for it also.
I mean,
wow.
What was that like? Like the day you get that phone call, hey, have you checked the list? Your script just got nominated for Seinfeld. What's that like?
It was really, the whole thing was really weird. You know, I wrote it the winter before it premiered, like in January, and it premiered, it premiered the new season in September. And I turned to my wife and I said, you know, Seinfeld is my episode is premiering the season. I'm going to get nominated for an Emmy for this. just because they, you know, the reason I was thinking that is that, you know, there are just so many quality shows that get Emmy nominations, and Seinfeld was certainly one of them. And the fact that they premiered the season with my episode made me feel that I might get a nomination. I wasn't even thinking of the Writers Guild Award, which I wound up winning at the time, but which came in later. But it was, it's very exciting. It's incredibly exciting. My daughter actually won an Emmy for her first script, and I went to the Emmys with her for that, and I started crying. I was so thrilled for her. They flashed me on national television, me crying. My daughter won. But, you know, I'm entitled. She's my kid.
So I didn't know your daughter was a writer. That's interesting.
Well, yeah. And like I said, you know, she's kind of lived the miracle of show business that happens once in a blue moon to people. She was at USC Film School studying, and she called me today and said, I take this feature rewrite course from one of the writers of The Sopranos because they're having a long hiatus, and he's able to teach a course here. Well, that teacher turned out to be Matt Weiner, who created Mad Men.
Yeah.
And I think she was in one of her first or second jobs. She was working as an assistant to executive producer, and Matt found her on Facebook and said, "What are you doing?" And she said, "Well, I'm working for this. I'm an assistant to this executive producer." And he said, "Well, if I knew you were willing to be assistant, you could have been my assistant." So she called me and she said, "Dad, what should I do?" And I said, "What do you mean, what should you do?" Call him back and say, "If you ever have a job that opens up, I would love to work with you." Within 2 weeks, she was his writer's assistant. And at the end of the season, they co-wrote the finale. This was the third season of Mad Men, and they won the Emmy.
Wow.
Wow.
And then the next season, she was put on staff, and she won the Writers Guild Award for her own solo script.
Good
So that's
genes.
pretty impressive.
She's
She
got
stayed
good
in Mad Men
genes.
to the end of the run, and she's making money hand over fist, which is great. I'm very happy for her.
Like I said, good genes. She's got the writing and the genes.
Well, I'd like to take credit for it. I'll try.
Deserve it.
So now
But
tell
yeah.
me, were you on set for Seinfeld when the episode that you
Yeah, it was a spec thing. You know, I knew Larry and I had pitched him a couple of things and it just didn't work out. And then I called him on the phone one day and said, "How's this for a pitch?" And it was just one line, basically. Elaine tells Jerry that all the time they were dating, she never had an orgasm. And he said, "We got to do this one." And I went in and we beat out the story and, the whole deal. So that was fun.
Sure. And how much were you on set? Like, were there rewrites, or how much was that just magic from when it started filming? Or
Now, there's one thing you have to know about television. There's always rewrites. Now, I mean, there's just no question about it. I don't care who you are. If you're Larry David, you're rewriting your own stuff. But generally, you finish a script and the room rewrites the script. They throw in punch-ups or whatever else they want to do. On Seinfeld, it's different. Larry rewrote all the scripts. So in other words, he was working day and night. He was killing himself. And obviously the product turned out to be great, but it was different than other shows in that respect.
now, how did it compare to, like, you as Seamus alluded to, you also were writing on Who's the Boss?
Yeah.
Now, how did you approach those projects differently?
Well, you approach them according to what the show is. You have to look at the individual show. You can't just randomly come up with a story that could fit any show, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, were you fans? I mean, were you like a fan of these shows that you watched, like Seinfeld?
Well, I was definitely a fan of Seinfeld. Who's the Boss? I knew of. I mean, when you're a TV writer, you try to study the shows that are on the air. So in case you ever get called to come in and talk to them, an interview about staff or to pitch a show, you know what you're talking about. Because you got to know the characters. In the Who's the Boss case, I looked at the show and I said, Tony always talks about his deceased wife as if she was a saint and how much he was in love with her. I said, what happens if he finds out that he thought she was having an affair? How would he react to that? And that was my Who's the Boss episode that they wanted to do. And we ended it with we ended it with that she never had an affair. What she did, she was taking art lesson, and him being the macho husband didn't want her to leave the house and go to school. And it made him feel guilty about that at the end. But, I always try to look at the characters and their history and try and come up with a story that's basically natural to who they are and what would come up. And if that's what I feel like, because there are people who just come in with pitches of stories that they could do on any show, and I try to make it very, endemic to the characters, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, Lauren. So I feel like I loved Who's the Boss. I loved Seinfeld. I feel like you've written part of my life.
Well, thank you. Thank
really?
you. Hopefully it has a happy ending.
Yes, it is a happy ending right now. Yes, it is.
Thank you.
So I was in New York. I lived in New York at the time, and I just on the upper West Side where the cafe was. So it was just everything was there, and being at the time in New York, because I'm from Ireland originally. Everything just hit me. I think that some non-New Yorkers wouldn't get it, all the jokes, but just being a New Yorker, I just got them all.
Yeah, I mean, New York is, I mean, Larry's like an icon in New York. He did a Broadway show there, and they were just waiting for a line from Curb, you know, and which is terrific. But what's interesting about Seinfeld is that it's caught on also with the younger generation who weren't even alive when the show was on the air. It just shows you how good the show is, how it travels well in time, you know.
Sure. Oh, yeah. I think it is there are some shows that are timeless, even like Dick Van Dyke. I go back and I watch an episode, even though it's black and white, it's kind of timeless. It
Yeah.
doesn't age, as opposed to like a Gilligan's Island or even the Brady
Well, I mean,
Bunch that didn't really age as well.
it was a very well written show, the Dick Van Dyke Show, and obviously Seinfeld was too, and those shows. It's the ones that, I mean, people kill me for saying this, but Gilligan's Island was a fun show, but it was, a little silly, and just may not hold up over time. Where I think even Lucy, I Love Lucy, holds up over time.
Oh yeah, I agree.
There are certain shows that the way they are written and who the characters are, they just last. And it's a tribute to those writers and actors and directors on those shows.
Absolutely. I mean, and you did the Love Boat too, right?
I did several of those. I did several Fantasy Islands. Look, one thing I found out, no matter what the quality of the show is, there's always something to learn as a writer when you write it. Love Boat basically was 20-minute stories because they had 3 stories in an hour. So if you did one of the stories, you needed to be able to write it so that the people who've been away to watch the other stories, when they come back, they know where you are. They remember what was going on with your story,
So did you only have to write, did you write the whole episode or only
No,
one
I mean, Love
part?
Boat was Love Boat and Fantasy Island both were written. 3 different writers on the 3 different stories on Love Boat.
Wow.
2 different writers on the 2 stories in Fantasy Island.
I had no idea.
Yeah. Although I do have a funny story about Fantasy Island.
Tell me.
I've written 4 episodes of that show, and one of them I called Queen for a Day, which was, it's about an overworked mother and housewife who just wanted to be queen for a day. And as they mess with people on Fantasy Island, they made her Marie Antoinette on the verge of the revolution. So, I mean, that's what they do. They mess with people on Fantasy Island. So at the very end of the episode, she is running out of Paris because obviously everybody survives on Paris. In Fantasy Island, Marie Antoinette in real life didn't survive, but this one is going to survive. And she meets this guy on the road who's going to Paris on a horse with a 4-cornered hat and his hand in here. And he goes, "Is this the road to Paris?" And the executive producers looked at me and said, "You can't do that." And I said, "Why can't we do it?" And he said, "Our audience doesn't know who Napoleon is."
Oh boy.
I mean, that lack of respect it shows in the stories and in the writing, that lack of respect for your audience. And funny, I said to him at that time, because it was true at the time, I said, "What do you mean? He's doing American Express commercials." Because they had this American Express commercial with Napoleon on a boat rocking all over the place. So,
I remember.
But they wouldn't let me do that. So that was never in the show. But I always found that interesting as to how people view their audience, and it affects what they put on the screen. Today, they give your audience a lot more credit for their intelligence,
Well, you're Ivy League educated too. I mean, you're from Cornell University, correct?
True. Yeah.
Yeah. So you may be, smarter than the average bear too, as well.
Well, I may be, but Napoleon? Come on. That's not a rocket scientist who's heard of Napoleon.
I gotta give you that. I was trying. I was really trying to even that out, but I throw in the towel. You're right.
I mean, they were nice guys, it was just their opinion of what they're on. And look, who am I to argue? The show went on for God knows how many years. So, You know what I'm saying? It's like, it's not, they may have been right for all I know. I mean, not right that their audience didn't know it, but the type of things to put on the air because it was working for them.
What's the creative process look like for you? I mean, when you're about to sit down and write a script, I mean, do you jog first? Do you need to meditate? I mean, is there a process, or it's just like I can be doing the dishes and I work the whole thing out in my head?
I do a lot of pacing. Seriously, a lot of thinking, pacing. Sometimes I'll go for a drive and think about the story because you really got to get the story down right. That's the first thing. And especially when you're dealing with television, I mean, on a show with commercials, a half-hour show is 22 minutes. You have to tell a story in 22 minutes. Yeah. An hour show is like 44 minutes. You have to tell a full hour drama in 44 minutes. So you can't have any extraneous stuff in there that doesn't have to do with the stories and the character. Because you don't have enough time to tell your story.
Right.
And it's interesting. It's got to be very exact in that respect. And then eventually I get the story down and I'll put it down in order and then eventually start writing when I feel I know it well enough.
So you write like from a time, you create some element of an outline in advance.
Yeah. Well, I mean, most shows, you'll do an outline, which another name for it is a treatment, but we call an outline in television. But you do a treatment with the whole story, which for a half-hour show is about 6 or 7 pages or something like that, or maybe 8. And for an hour show, it's a little longer. And they look at it and see if you've got it down, if it's what they want, or if they want some changes or, whatever. And then you go to script.
Are you big on rewrites? Do you rewrite yourself?
Am I big on rewrite?
Yeah. Do you rewrite yourself?
Oh, I rewrite. Oh, definitely. I mean, but there's a famous quote: "Writing is rewriting." But like, for giving an example, when I write something, whether it's a script or one of my novels, when I sit down in the morning, I usually go over what I wrote the day before. And that'll get me going, and I'll start rewriting that and getting that going and seeing everything there is okay, and then I can continue on. And once you finish, you go over it, and there's a lot of things that you realize you missed or wanted to add, and you go over it that way. And in TV, you don't have the time, but with novels, you can hand it out to 1 or 2 people and see what their opinion is. And if there's a consensus of opinion about something, you might make some changes.
Right. Do you have a most memorable moment of your television writing career, whether it's being on a set or...
Well, I mean, it's hard not to say winning the Writers Guild Award. That was, that's a very memorable moment for me, to get up there and accept the award. And then it was really weird because I got, you accept the award, then you go back and you talk to the press or whatever. And then on the way out, what was really strange for me, there were people outside the Writers Guild Awards. I didn't think there'd be anybody who cared about writers, but there were people outside the Writers Guild Awards, and they were asking for autographs. And I said, "You want my autograph?" It's like, because you think that you're anonymous, that nobody cares about you. They'd want Jason Alexander, Jerry Seinfeld, Michael Richards. Why the hell do they want my autograph? but they did. And that was kind of fun, actually.
Well, sure. I mean, at the time, Seinfeld was on top of his game. Go ahead. I'm sorry, I interrupted you, Shanice.
That's okay. Lawrence, so I had the same experience with the autograph thing, 'cause I did do the boxing and I fought Holyfield back in the day. But I remember the first time someone wanted my autograph, I was like, what my, whatever. Anyway, so did you have any mentors?
Mentors. Okay, that's a good question. I'm thinking, not really that much. I took a class. See, I started out as an actor, okay? And I studied at the Neighborhood Playhouse in New York with Sandy Meisner, who was at the time one of the top acting teachers in the world. And I was there for 2 years, and I went out and I did a bunch of roles, small roles, but some in plays, some in television. I had the lead in some plays, but they were like off-Broadway stuff, and summer stock. And after a while, when I was out here in Los Angeles, I was getting these 5-line parts, 10-line parts. I got a continuing role on a show called Heck Ramsey with Richard Boone, who and was supposed to go to an hour series, 22 episodes, and I was told that I'd be a regular on it. And then Richard and Lou Osman had a big argument, and he walked off the series, and that was the end of Heck Ramsey. But I just didn't feel fulfilled doing it. I felt I would go into casting directors' offices, and I could tell from the look on their face when I walked in, before I read anything, either I looked the role or I didn't look the role. And it was a very physical thing. And I always wanted to write, but when I was at Cornell, I was kind of cowed by the professors in creative writing classes who would talk about Shakespeare and Hemingway and Fitzgerald in such a revered way that we could never measure up to them. And so I felt a little intimidated and didn't think about that. And then after I was out here for a while, I looked at the writing and I said, well, I can do that. And I sat down, and the first thing I wrote, I sold, which was a wonderful indication of what I should be doing. And now, if you asked me, I'd much rather write than ever think about acting. I just love what I do.
What was the first thing that you sold?
It was a pilot to ABC about summer camp. It wound up not becoming a series, but it was my first credit, and it got me an agent and got me started.
Wow. Wonderful.
I have to move to your book writing. You're an author. You started, which I think is an odd choice for you, and I want to poke your brain as to what made you pick a female. I think that's very, enlightened of you. But your lead character is Mary Handley, and she winds up being a female detective set in like the 1800s.
Right.
So
Now,
not even a time.
Let me tell you how that came about. That's the book, Second Street Station. I helped my son on a school project that he was doing. It had to do with Edison. And I did some research on Edison, and I was looking at the fight over the electricity market between him and Tesla. And all of a sudden I said to myself, wouldn't it be interesting if I told this story around a real murder that happened back then? And I did some research and found Mary Handley, who worked in a sweatshop and was asked to help find this woman who murdered this man. And so that's how, and then she wound up taking over the book, that character. She was, I try to make her as, I didn't know the character of the real Mary, but I try to make her who I would have wanted her to be, and I fell in love with her, and the 4 publishers that were bidding to get the book fell in love with her. And that's how that came about. And it was the first book I ever wrote,
Wow. You
which
never
is
know.
pisses a lot of other writers off when I tell them that. But I was very fortunate. Let me put it that way. Very, very fortunate.
It's
And that turned into a 4-book series, you know?
Which I'm reading my way through. Seamus, I didn't cut you off. I just wanted to throw that out there. I'm actually reading my way through. But
Thank you. It's
addictive.
called the Mary Handley Mystery series, but you know, the Second Street Station, then there's Brooklyn on Fire, and you know, and Last Stop in Brooklyn, and Near Prospect Park. Those are the 4 books that are out, and you don't have to read them in order, but it would be helpful. But I try to write them as if they're standalones. You know?
Sure, because I jumped. I started with your Second Street Station, and now I'm on near Prospect Park, which is like the 4th. But I plan on going back for the other 2. It's an addictive read. If you haven't started reading it, I mean, he created a character that's like way ahead of her time, in who she is, and she just
that was my point of doing that. And she, you know, tries to. Even though she's a woman in those times, she's struggling and fighting to be her own person, you know? And so, I mean, I would say something about Near Prospect Park, because before that is where she met her husband in the book before that.
Right. I figured once I started
I said, oh, I missed something. He played you got to know him better in the 3rd book, you know, when she met him. But so in any case, there's something I really love about writing novels that you don't always get in writing for television or film. And that is, you get to say how the person's feeling and what they're thinking, where you have to depend on the directors and the actors in television and film to get across a lot of the message that you wrote about. And sometimes it works. Sometimes it's better than you ever expected. And a lot of times you're disappointed. So just in writing novels, it's all on you.
And I'm sorry,
you know, you're the one who says those things.
Seamus, you had a question before and I interrupted you. I apologize.
No problem. It's your podcast, Tony.
No.
Lawrence, so my background was boxing. I had a somewhat good career in boxing, professional, amateurs, and on the way. Such a solitary endeavor, unlike a football team or a collaborative situation. Did you feel the same way with writing? Because it is such a solitary endeavor.
Well, you know, quite frankly, in the media, television, film, there is a very collaborative feeling to it. Writing a novel, you're on your own. I mean, of course, if you sell it, editors may have notes for you, which they do. I was very lucky, and the notes were fairly light on my 4 books. But in television, for sure, is so collaborative. It's so many writers who are involved, and you talk to them and you toss ideas around. And in fact, there are many shows on television. In fact, Bob Meyer started this on Roseanne at some point. It was after I had worked on it. And then Chuck Lorre, who worked for him, does it on all his shows. They write the script in the room with all the writers there.
Wow.
On some shows. And what Chuck Lorre does is that they take turns putting names on credits, like as many names as you can put on the script that's allowed by the Writers Guild, you'll put on that script, and you choose 4 or 5 people, and then next script you choose another 4 or 5 people. But the script was written by the room, the writer's room. Now, that's not every show does that, but that's to give you an idea. Chuck Lorre shows, and he's had quite a few half hours that have done that. Otherwise, what happens in the room is you come up with a story and everybody bandages it around. And then for all you know, you go out and you do your outline. And we talk about the outline afterwards, and you go out and you do your script. but everybody, there's input, in most shows from the room on that stuff.
And you mentioned Roseanne. Actually, I neglected to ask you about that. You also wrote for Roseanne.
Yeah, I did a show called, I think it was called Secrets. I can't remember the name. I'm trying. Sorry, it's been a while. Yeah, I did an episode of Roseanne, and had to do with their financial situation.
Was there any script
Done.
that you enjoyed for any of all the shows you've written for? And there's certainly was Saved by the Bell too, which I didn't touch upon. There's really been so many. Was there any particular script that you were the proudest of?
Well, it's hard for me to not say Seinfeld.
Sure.
I mean, I won so many accolades for that. It's very hard for me not to say that. It certainly has to be that.
Is that the same as the
I
one
was just happy. I was just happy as a writer that I didn't have to do anything else to supplant my income. I was able to put 2 kids through private school and college, and I made enough money to do all that stuff as a working writer, which is not easy to do. And sometimes I chide myself because I've never had a great success like Larry David has, where he created a series and hundreds of millions of dollars are still coming in. But I've been a working writer for many years, and I've never had to do anything else. And I love what I do. And I have a good lifestyle, and my family had a good lifestyle. So
well, it's hard for me to imagine that inevitably they're not going to option the movie rights to your present Mary Handley.
Thank you. Yeah, I hope that happens. I had a bad experience when the book first came out with Warner Brothers. They wanted it, they optioned it, and then I never met with the head of development there. And then it was just very strange. And I had a call once which said, telling me everything that they wanted to do with it, which is exactly what I wanted to do with it. And I'm sure they were just filling my head with nonsense. And they attached me to some producers there, but I never really met with the development people. And 10 months go by, and all of a sudden I hear, well, they're not buying that many period pieces anymore. I want to do something different with this. And I said, no, this is the way it should be. And if you hadn't wasted all this time, we could have gotten this going. So I pulled the project from them. And now hopefully we'll see what happens if I place it someplace else. I mean, it's the first time I ever stood my ground on something, where the other times, because my kids were grown and out of the house, so I could, all of a sudden put my foot down and say, I don't have to pay for college this year. So no, I want it done the way I want it done. So that's what happened. Yeah.
Love it. I love it. And I just had the question, I'm from Ireland, maybe obvious about my accent, but you're so down to earth. It's so refreshing to interview you and to hear your stories and stuff. Like it's like with Joyce and his most famous book, Ulysses. His book was about a simple person and a day in the life of Leopold Bloom. And
right.
You brought so there's something about that. It's just like the obvious, and it's down to earth, and there's comedy everywhere. Really,
it's funny. I kid around with friends of mine saying, I'm going to write my autobiography. I'm going to title it "It Ain't Fair." Just, because there really isn't anything that's that fair in life. Things do happen that are wonderful, and things happen that are bad. But trying to explain them, half of them. But that came from when I was a little kid. I was about 7 or 8 years old, and we were living in Queens at the time. And I'd come home from school, and my mother had a window. We were at a second floor co-op. And my mother had a window the kitchen window was right facing out to the front, and I'd come and I go, "Mom, it ain't fair. The teacher did this to me. It did that to me." We're just. So, I mean, I got that phrase from that, and, it does apply to show business a lot.
Mm.
Things happen. Sometimes great projects don't get done, and sometimes terrible projects get done. It is the way it is. It's a business of opinion,
Again, back for my own experience, when you box as an amateur in Ireland, and you go to the ring, and it's just terrifying. But the kids do it anyway. My dad kind of made me do it. Terrifying, being in the ring, fighting somebody. You never know what's going to happen. You go to the middle of the ring, and the referee comes there with the two fighters, and the last thing the referee says to you before you start, before the bell goes, is go back to your corners and come out fighting. That just reverberates in my head and it haunts me, that kind of thing. So
let me ask you, what got you started in fighting? Why did you want to fight if that terrified you? I'm just curious,
I didn't. My dad was a fighter, and he wanted to live, wanted us to, he wanted the best for us, but that's how he went about it, was to make us become champions, which we were in Ireland. And yeah.
That's fabulous,
Yeah.
That's very difficult what you did is pretty amazing. So, congratulations to you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I don't regret it, but I wouldn't have my son do it.
Yeah, I talked my son out of playing football, so, so I know what you mean. Yeah, he was a tremendous athlete, and he was a high jump. He wound up high jumping for UCLA, and he was also a really good basketball player. He got offered for certain colleges to play basketball, but when UCLA offered him, he always wanted to go to UCLA, so he went there, and just to high jump. But in high school, they came to him because he was tall and a good jumper and fast. They wanted him as a wide receiver. Yes. And I said to him, "Josh, if you play football and you get hurt, you won't be able to play basketball and you won't be able to do track." And so he stepped away from that, and I was forever happy. I wasn't going to tell him you can't do it. I just wanted to reason with him about it. Sorry about that.
No problem.
The phone's ringing.
He's well aware of the flop, huh?
Pardon me?
He's well aware of the Fosbury flop.
Oh, very well aware. He wound up jumping 6'11".
What?
Yeah. He wound up jumping 6'11" in his junior year at UCLA. And I think he would have gone well over 7 foot in his senior year, but he hurt his foot and he couldn't do it anymore at that point. So, but yeah, that's how good he was. He was a good athlete.
Wow.
Well, I know we're out of time, but I would like to invite you and hope you'll come back to talk about your next installment on your Mary Handley Mysteries. As I said, he's got 4 out right now. It is totally worth the read. It's somewhat of an addicting read. Once you get started, you're not going to want to part with her. I think that you're correct, though. You probably should read them in order. I didn't realize that when I jumped to the fourth.
The point is, you can read them as standalones.
You can, sure.
It's a little bit better. There are certain characters that continue, but yeah, it's better if you do it in order.
Right. I think so, because I feel like I'm missing a little bit of the nuance for how she got from A to B. So I may actually put it down and go back and pick up number 2. But
yeah, in 2 she goes out to become a private investigator, which she was working for the police department in 1 in Second Street Station. So.
And I love that it's historically based. So he weaves in many characters that are real.
And also actually there's real history about those characters. A lot of the things I write about those characters are true.
Sure. And I think number 1 was based on a partially true story as well.
Yes, it was. I don't want to give away the ending of one on a podcast, but what happens at the end with Edison is based on a real story. about him.
It's exciting and fascinating. I highly recommend the series of books, and I hope you'll come back when you write your next installment, maybe to talk to us about it.
I certainly hope that happens. Right now, there's no installment in place, but I'm hoping to get one soon. But I will. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, because I would love to continue talking about your books. And certainly, I think there's got to be a movie coming down the pike as well. This is too significant a character, too interesting to not have that happen. So
Thank you. Thank
please.
you. Yeah, I'm in love with Mary, so it's part of, she's like part of my DNA now. It's but yeah,
So
4
please.
books, you can't not be in love with the person.
Honored to meet you and interview you, Lawrence. Thank you.
It's an honor to meet you too, Seamus, and you too, Tony. It was really lovely talking with the two of you.
Thank you so much. And again, don't forget us. Please come back to talk about, things.
Anytime you want me to come back, I'm more than happy to do it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. You
Bye,
take care.
everybody.
Bye-bye.